Hello and welcome to the Locus Magazine New Books Roundup for the week of May 3rd, 2022. May the 3rd be with you, or may the 4th be with you. This will probably come out on May 4th anyway. This is the weekly roundup of new books. I'm going to tell you about what's slated to come out this week in science fiction, fantasy, horror, and young adult genre books. These are all new books, not a complete list of every book that is coming out, obviously, but definitely some new titles we think you'll want to know about. If you love books the way we love books, there's sure to be something for you. And to help us keep doing this every week, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when there's new content. Tell your best friend, tell your worst enemy, keep them busy, and tell your neighbor with questionable politics that they should check out these books. All of that helps us keep doing these videos. So let's get into it. If you didn't know already, books are usually released on Tuesdays, mostly to try to maximize the chance of getting onto the bestseller lists, like the New York Times list and other ones, which track sales from Tuesday to Monday each week. So our list starts from Tuesday. These books are in no particular order, but they are books that are supposed to launch this week. We're going to start with some fantasy novels. Holly Black wrote a novel for adults! You might know Holly Black from her children's and young adult novels, including The Spiderwick Chronicles. The New York Times says Black is a master at world building. The new book is called Book of Night, coming out from Tor in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. This is a contemporary dark fantasy novel. Charlie Hall has been making a career of stealing from magicians for magicians, but now she's trying to get away from all of that. Needless to say, it's not easy, and things get complicated from there. In the May issue of Locus, we have an interview with the writer Dhonielle Clayton, and she said this about Holly Black. Her books are dark woods. She lures you in, and then the trees start growing around you, and you can't get out. They're atmospheric, and they're terrifying. I'm trapped in the dark wood of her imagination, and I always want to be there. She's phenomenal. Book of Night by Holly Black has gotten a lot of praise, including this from Pulitzer Prize finalist Kelly Link, who says, heart, soul, and a bit of kink. The Book of Night is smart, decadent fun. And Paolo Bacigalupi, New York Times bestselling author of The Water Knife, called it a deliciously clever page-turner. I quoted Dhonielle Clayton a moment ago. We also have a book from Clayton coming out this week, also a fantasy novel, this one for middle grade readers. This book is called The Marvelers. It's illustrated by Khadija Khatib. Forgive me if I've pronounced that wrong. And The Marvelers is coming out from Holt in hardcover, ebook, and audio. While we're in the neighborhood of middle grade fantasy, let me tell you about a book from Lindsay, Eagar, called The Patron Thief of Bread. This is a middle grade fantasy novel coming out from Candlewick Press in hardcover, ebook, and audio. The protagonist is an 8-year-old named Duck, spelled like the aquatic creature with the feathers. I wanted to call it a mammal, but ducks lay eggs, so not a mammal. Anyway, the duck in the book is 8 years old. She's raised by street urchins, and she's posing as a baker's apprentice in order to steal, but then she begins to question her allegiances. From here, we're going to mention a few more adult fantasy titles. The New York Times bestselling author Sharon McGuire has a new book called Seasonal Fears, coming out from Tor.com in hardcover, ebook, and audio. This is a fantasy novel and a companion novel to McGuire's book Middle Game that came out in 2019. Like a lot of good genre stories, the language is taken literally. It's called Seasonal Fears, and yes, we are talking about the 4 seasons of the year that you might have where you live. The King of Winter and the Queen of Summer are dead. The fight for their crown begins. Melanie has a destiny, though it isn't the one everyone assumes it to be. Everyone thinks she's dying, but Harry isn't trying to believe in that destiny. They've got to work out a new plan if they want to be together for a whole lifetime. Speaking of problems with kings and queens, there's a book coming out from Ashok K. Bankor called The Blind King's Wrath from Harper Voyager US. This is an adult fantasy novel coming out in trade paperback, ebook, and audio. Their works have all been bestsellers in India and have sold around the world. Ashok made their picture book debut with the multiple award-winning I Am Brown. Upcoming in May is The Blind King's Wrath, the third and final book in the Burnt Empire trilogy, where a reincarnated daughter is trying to stop her father, the king, from claiming the throne and taking over the empire. Ashok Bankor is the author of over 80 books, and this one is the third in the Ramayana series. They have a debut thriller novel as well, coming out in June, called A Kiss After Dying. Stepping slightly aside from the epic king and queen and empire type fantasy. Next, I want to tell you about a historical fantasy novel by Kelly Barnhill called When Women Were Dragons. This novel for adults is coming out from Doubleday in hardcover, ebook, and audio. I love the title. This book is set in a 1950s America where something happened in 1955 that caused thousands of women to suddenly transform into dragons and cause a lot of chaos and destruction. Now a girl called Alex Green has to deal with a world where notions of a woman's place in the world are changing, but it's forbidden to talk about it. This is the author's debut adult novel. So that's a whole bunch of fantasy, both for adults and for younger readers. Next up, I want to tell you about a couple of science fiction novels. The first is a debut novel from a journalist turned author, Vauhini Vara. The book is called The Immortal King Rao. Please forgive my pronunciation if I got any of that wrong. The book is coming out from Norton in hardcover, ebook, and audio. Ian Mond reviewed The Immortal King Rao in the May issue of Locus, saying, "This is the third book I've read this year that imagines a future where people have direct neural access to social media and the internet. This growing literary trend, a mix of cyberpunk and transhumanism, isn't entirely surprising. It makes sense that authors, already suspicious of the motives of Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and their significant investments in the metaverse and neurotechnology, would start to question the benefits of such uninhibited progress, whether it be concerns about privacy, the loss of individuality, or the emergence of a new caste system where an all-seeing, all-knowing algorithm determines social worth." This book is about a kid born into a Dalit family in India who spends his formative years in a coconut plantation owned by the Rao family. At the age of 22, our protagonist is now a software developer who emigrates to America and gets involved in creating this future of technology we're all so afraid of. As Mond says, this book is both a strong debut and an important addition to a growing canon of novels addressing our rising anxiety and concerns about where the digital age is taking us. Next, I'll mention another science fiction novel, this one by DJ Butler, who also writes as Dave Butler. The book is called Abbott in Darkness, and it's coming out from Bain Books in trade paperback, ebook, and audio. Publishers Weekly had this to say: Butler and Richie return to Depression-era Utah for a second thrilling tale of murder and folk magic after The Cunning Man. The play between Hiram's earnest Mormonism and the more secular Michael's growing unease with folk magic add depth to the father-son dynamic. And the false leads and eccentric side characters make for a delightful mystery. This well-crafted historical fantasy is sure to please. This from Publishers Weekly. We should also mention that there's a new novel coming out from Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. It's a science fiction novel in the Liaden universe called Fair Trade. This book is also coming out from Bain in hardcover, ebook, and audio. Fair Trade is about an ambitious young man, Jethry, who's risen from being the youngest on a Terran family loop ship to second trader on premier Liaden trade ship Elthoria, under the guidance of his unlikely foster mother, who expects great things from him. The story will test his loyalties as Jethry has to deal with a tangle of galactic politics, mistaken identity, and misinformation. Anne McCaffrey says, every now and then you come across an author, or in this case, a pair, who writes exactly what you want to read. The characters and personalities that make you enjoy meeting them. I rarely rave on and on about stories, but I am devoted to Lee and Miller novels and stories. And we mostly told you about fantasy and science fiction novels coming out this week, but I also want to mention a horror novel called The Hacienda by author Isabel Cañas. This book is coming out from Berkeley in hardcover, ebook, and audio. It's a gothic, haunted house horror novel set in Mexico after the War of Independence, following a young bride and a haunted house. This is a first novel. And in case you missed it, there's another horror novel that came out recently that we want to tell you about. It's called Road of Bones by Christopher Golden, and it came out from St. Martin's Press in hardcover this past January. Locus reviewer Gabino Iglesias had this to say: Christopher Golden's Road of Bones packs a mixture of horror and adventure into its 240 pages that makes it feel like a 100-page novella. Full of memorable characters and taking place in a truly unique and inhospitable location, the narrative walks a fine line between an all-out horror story about impossible creatures threatening a group of people, and a story about perseverance and friendship that looks at the way we're haunted by past experiences, history, our own failures, and even past relationships. That from Gabino Iglesias in the March issue of Locus. All right, thanks so much for watching. Please don't forget, it's super important that you subscribe to the channel, like us, follow us in all the places you can follow us. We are called @LocusMag on most platforms. Also, make sure to write a secret note to your best friend telling them to subscribe, roll it up into a little tube, and hide it in their shampoo bottle. They will thank you later. And if you'd like to know more about Locus Magazine, we cover science fiction, fantasy, horror, and young adult books that are coming out. We do book reviews, we interview authors, talk to artists, cover writers' workshops and conventions, all kinds of stuff. And the magazine has been doing that and generally covering the genre field for decades. Go check us out at our website, www.locusmag.com. I'll put a link below the video. You can actually subscribe to the print magazine and it will show up at your house and you can read it on paper or a digital edition and you can read it on your device. I don't care. Any way helps. or you can donate to what we do via our Patreon or a direct donation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week with more new books.